Money has a way of changing people. It can turn a desperate father into a calculated risk-taker, a failing ranch into a battleground, and a single night into a lifetime of consequences. When Marcus Thompson received that phone call on a Tuesday evening in March, he had exactly $73 in his checking account and a foreclosure notice burning a hole in his kitchen table. The voice on the other end offered him $10,000 for one night's work. No questions asked. No guarantees given. Just $10,000 and a choice that would test every moral fiber he thought he possessed. The rancher's weathered hands trembled slightly as he gripped the phone tighter. Outside his kitchen window, the vast Montana landscape stretched endlessly, dotted with cattle that might not be his much longer. His wife Sarah was upstairs, unaware that their entire future hung in the balance of this conversation. His daughter Emma was at college, trusting that her tuition would be paid next semester. And, somewhere in the darkness of that March night, a stranger was offering him a lifeline that felt more like a noose. "What exactly are you asking me to do?" Marcus had whispered into the phone, already knowing that whatever the answer was, he was probably going to say yes. Desperation has a way of making saints into sinners and turning good men into accomplices. The rancher slowly tightened his grip and turned toward a decision that would change everything. Marcus Thompson had been staring at the foreclosure notice for 3 hours when the phone rang. The document lay spread across his kitchen table like a death certificate, its legal language as cold and unforgiving as the Montana winter that had just released its grip on his ranch. The words blurred together after a while, but the meaning was crystal clear: 60 days to pay $200,000, or lose everything his family had built over 3 generations. The phone's shrill ring cut through the silence of the farmhouse. Sarah had gone to bed early, exhausted from another day of trying to make their dwindling savings stretch. Their daughter Emma was hundreds of miles away at college, blissfully unaware that her father was considering dropping out to help save the ranch. Marcus let the phone ring twice before answering, his voice rough with exhaustion and defeat. "Thompson residence. Marcus Thompson?" The voice was unfamiliar, smooth and confident with just a hint of an accent he couldn't place. "Yeah, that's me. Who's this?" "My name is Vincent Carrera. I represent certain business interests in the area. I understand you might be facing some financial difficulties." Marcus felt his stomach drop. Word traveled fast in small towns, and the last thing he needed was some lone shark circling like a vulture. "I don't know what you've heard, but relax, Mr. Thompson. I'm not calling to collect anything. Quite the opposite, actually. I'm calling to offer you an opportunity." "What kind of opportunity?" There was a pause on the other end, and Marcus could hear the faint sound of traffic in the background. Vincent wasn't calling from anywhere local. The kind that could solve your immediate problems. $10,000, Mr. Thompson. Cash. For one night's work. Marcus nearly dropped the phone. 10,000 wouldn't solve everything, but it would buy him time. Time to negotiate with the bank, time to figure out a plan, time to keep his family from losing their home. "What's the catch?" Vincent chuckled softly. "No catch. Just a simple job that requires someone with your particular skills and discretion." "My skills? I'm a cattle rancher. I don't know what you think I can do for you." "You're a man with a clean record, Mr. Thompson. No criminal history, no outstanding warrants, no flags in any government databases. You're also desperate enough to take risks you wouldn't normally consider. That combination is exactly what I need." The honesty of the statement hit Marcus like a physical blow. This stranger had done his homework, knew exactly how vulnerable Marcus was right now. It should have been a warning sign, but, instead, it felt almost refreshing after weeks of pretending everything was fine. "What exactly are you asking me to do?" "Transport a package from point A to point B. That's it. No questions asked, no details shared. You pick up a package tomorrow night, drive it to a specified location, and drop it off. The entire job takes maybe 6 hours, and you walk away $10,000 richer. What's in the package? I just told you, Mr. Thompson. No questions asked. That's part of what makes this arrangement so simple. Marcus closed his eyes and rubbed his temples. Every instinct he had was screaming that this was dangerous, illegal, or both. But the foreclosure notice seemed to pulse with malevolent energy from where it lay on the table, and he could hear Sarah shifting restlessly upstairs, probably wondering how they were going to break the news to Emma. Where would I be picking up this package? There's an abandoned grain elevator about 20 miles north of your ranch. Highway 89, just past mile marker 47. You know it? Marcus did know it. The old Morrison place had been abandoned for decades, nothing but rusted metal and broken dreams sitting in the middle of nowhere. It was the perfect place for a clandestine exchange. And where would I be taking it? A warehouse in Billings. I'll give you the exact address tomorrow if you decide to take the job. What happens if I get caught with whatever this package is? Vincent's tone grew serious. Mr. Thompson, let me be very clear about something. The people I work for don't make mistakes. If you follow instructions exactly and keep your mouth shut, there will be no problems. If you deviate from the plan or try to be clever, there will be consequences. But if you're smart and do exactly what you're told, you'll be back home by sunrise with enough money to buy yourself some breathing room. And if I say no? Then you say no, and we never speak again. But I suspect you're not in a position to turn down $10,000, are you? Marcus looked around his kitchen, taking in the peeling paint on the windowsills, the old appliances that had been running on borrowed time for years, the stack of unpaid bills sitting next to his coffee mug. Vincent was right. He wasn't in a position to turn down anything right now. I need time to think about it. Of course. But I need an answer by tomorrow afternoon. Call this number if you're interested. Vincent rattled off a phone number. If I don't hear from you by 5 p.m. tomorrow, I'll assume you've declined and make other arrangements. The line went dead before Marcus could respond. He sat in the quiet kitchen, staring at the phone in his hand as if it might provide some answers. Outside, he could hear the wind picking up, rattling the loose boards on the barn that he couldn't afford to fix. The sound had become the soundtrack to his failures over the past few months. Marcus folded the foreclosure notice and slipped it into his shirt pocket, then climbed the creaky stairs to his bedroom. Sarah was asleep, her face peaceful in the moonlight streaming through their window. She'd been working double shifts at the diner in town, coming home exhausted but never complaining. She deserved better than this constant worry, this slow-motion catastrophe that seemed to get worse every day. He thought about his grandfather, who had built this ranch with his bare hands after returning from World War II. The old man had survived the Depression, fought in a foreign war, and carved out a life from the harsh Montana landscape through sheer determination and honest work. What would he think of his grandson considering a deal with criminals to save the family legacy? But then, Marcus thought about Emma, barely 19 and full of dreams about becoming a veterinarian. She was the first Thompson to go to college, the first to have a real shot at something beyond the endless cycle of drought and debt that had plagued ranchers for generations. How could he let her down? How could he tell her that her college fund was gone, that she'd have to drop out and come home to watch the bank auction off everything her family had ever worked for? Marcus lay awake until dawn, staring at the ceiling and weighing his options. By the time the sun came up, painting the Montana sky in shades of pink and gold, he had made his decision. It wasn't a good decision, and it wasn't an easy one, but it was the only one that felt like it gave his family a fighting chance. At 4:30 that afternoon, Marcus dialed the number Vincent had given him. "I'm in," he said when the smooth voice answered. "Excellent choice, Mr. Thompson. Here's what you need to know." The instructions were simple enough. drive to the grain elevator at midnight. Look for a black SUV parked behind the main building. Approach the vehicle alone, and someone would hand him a small package wrapped in brown paper. Take the package to a warehouse in Billings. The address was 2847 Industrial Boulevard, Building C. Park behind the building, flash his headlights 3 times, and wait for someone to come out. Hand over the package, collect his payment, and drive home. What about the $10,000? Marcus had asked. Half now, half on delivery. There's an envelope taped under the mailbox at the end of your driveway. Go check after we hang up. Sure enough, when Marcus walked down his long gravel driveway, he found a manila envelope secured with electrical tape to the bottom of his mailbox. Inside were 50 crisp $100 bills. More cash than he'd seen in months. It felt real in a way that the foreclosure notice somehow didn't. That evening, Marcus told Sarah he was driving to Billings to meet with a potential cattle buyer who could only meet late at night due to his schedule. It wasn't entirely a lie, he told himself. He was going to Billings, and he would come back with money that could help save their cattle operation. The fact that no cattle were involved was just a technicality. Sarah kissed him goodbye and told him to drive safely. The trust in her eyes made Marcus feel sick to his stomach, but he forced himself to smile and promise he'd be careful. At 11:30 p.m., Marcus climbed into his pickup truck and headed north on Highway 89. The night was clear and cold, with a thin sliver of moon casting shadows across the empty landscape. He'd driven this stretch of road thousands of times over the years, but tonight it felt different. Tonight, it felt like he was driving toward the edge of something he might not be able to come back from. The grain elevator appeared in his headlights exactly where he remembered it, a skeletal monument to agricultural dreams that had died decades ago. Marcus pulled off the highway and followed the crumbling access road toward the main building, his heart hammering in his chest. Behind the grain elevator, exactly as promised, sat a black SUV with tinted windows. Marcus parked 20 feet away and shut off his engine. For a moment, he sat in the darkness, giving himself one last chance to change his mind. He could start the truck, drive home, and pretend this had never happened. The $5,000 in his pocket would help, but it wouldn't solve the fundamental problem. In 2 months, the bank would still come for his ranch. A figure emerged from the SUV, silhouetted against the star-filled sky. Male, medium height, wearing dark clothing. The man approached Marcus's truck slowly, his hands visible and non-threatening. Marcus rolled down his window. "You Thompson?" "Yeah." The man handed him a package about the size of a hardcover book, wrapped in brown paper and sealed with tape. It was heavier than Marcus had expected, and something inside shifted slightly when he moved it. Straight to Billings. No stops, no detours. Don't open the package, don't shake it, don't try to X-ray it or figure out what's inside. Just transport it safely and collect your money. Got it. One more thing. The man leaned closer to the window. If you're thinking about getting creative, don't. We know where you live, where your wife works, where your daughter goes to school. This is business, nothing personal. But business stays business only as long as everyone follows the rules. Marcus nodded, his throat too dry to speak. The man stepped back from the truck and disappeared into the SUV. A moment later, the black vehicle pulled away, leaving Marcus alone with the package and his racing thoughts. He placed the package gently on the passenger seat and started his truck. As he drove back to the highway, Marcus couldn't help but notice how quiet everything seemed. No other vehicles on the road, no lights in the distance, nothing but him and whatever he was carrying toward Billings. The drive to the city took an hour and 40 minutes. Marcus spent most of it trying not to think about what might be in the package beside him. Drugs seemed most likely, but it could be anything. Money, documents, something worse. The weight and the way it shifted suggested multiple smaller items wrapped together. Billings looked different at 2 in the morning. The streets were mostly empty except for the occasional police cruiser and a few die-hard bar patrons making their way home. Marcus followed the GPS on his phone to Industrial Boulevard, a stretch of warehouses and shipping facilities on the south side of the city. Building C was a nondescript concrete structure with loading docks and minimal lighting. Marcus drove around to the back as instructed and parked facing the rear entrance. He flashed his headlights 3 times and waited. Within minutes, a door opened and another figure emerged. This one was older, wearing a suit despite the late hour. He walked calmly to Marcus's truck. "Package?" Marcus handed it over through the window. The man examined it briefly, checking the tape seals and overall condition. "Good work. Here's the rest of your payment." He handed Marcus another manila envelope, this one thicker than the first. Inside were 50 more $100 bills, exactly as promised. "Drive safe getting home, Mr. Thompson. And, remember what you were told about keeping quiet." The man disappeared back into the warehouse, and Marcus was alone again. He sat in his truck for a moment, staring at the envelope in his hands. $10,000. More money than his ranch had cleared in profit for the past 2 years. Money that could buy him time to figure out a real solution to his problems. The drive home passed in a blur. Marcus found himself checking his rearview mirror constantly, half expecting to see police lights or black SUVs following him. But the highway remained empty, and he made it back to his ranch without incident. Sarah was still asleep when he quietly slipped into bed at 4:30 a.m. Marcus lay awake watching the sky gradually lighten outside their bedroom window, the envelope of cash hidden in his dresser drawer like a guilty secret. He had crossed a line tonight, made a deal with people who lived in a world he didn't understand. But Emma's tuition was safe for another semester, and he had bought himself 2 months to figure out how to save the ranch through legitimate means. As sleep finally claimed him, Marcus tried to convince himself that it had been a one-time thing, a desperate measure for desperate times. He tried to ignore the part of his mind that wondered when Vincent Carrera might call again, and what he might be willing to do for the next envelope full of cash. 3 weeks had passed since that midnight drive to Billings, and Marcus had almost convinced himself it was over. The $10,000 had bought him precious time with the bank, enough to negotiate a temporary payment plan that kept the foreclosure wolves at bay. Sarah had been thrilled when he told her about the cattle buyer, who had paid cash for future delivery rights, and Emma had called to thank him for ensuring her spring semester tuition was covered. Everything seemed to be settling back to normal. Then, Vincent Carrera called again. This time, Marcus was in the barn when his cell phone rang, checking on a pregnant cow that had been showing signs of distress. The unfamiliar ringtone echoed off the wooden walls, causing the cattle to shift nervously in their stalls. "Hello, Mr. Thompson. I trust you've been well since our last arrangement?" Marcus felt his blood turn to ice water. "What do you want?" "Straight to business." "I appreciate that. I have another opportunity for you. Same terms, same compensation." "No." The word came out before Marcus could think about it. "I'm not interested." Vincent chuckled softly. "I think you might want to reconsider. You see, your situation hasn't really improved, has it? $10,000 bought you time, not solutions. The bank is still circling, your overhead costs haven't decreased, and cattle prices haven't magically rebounded." Marcus gripped the phone tighter. "I said no. Find someone else." "There is no one else, Mr. Thompson. You proved yourself reliable, discreet, and effective. Those qualities are rare in this business. Plus, you've already crossed the line once. The moral complexity of doing it again is significantly reduced. You don't know what you're talking about. Don't I? Let me ask you something. When you deposited that money, did you report it as income? Did you tell your wife where it really came from? Have you been sleeping soundly at night, or do you find yourself checking locks twice and jumping at unexpected sounds? Marcus said nothing, but Vincent's accuracy was unsettling. He had been having trouble sleeping, and he'd caught himself being paranoid about things that never used to bother him. The truth is, Mr. Thompson, you're already in this world whether you want to admit it or not. The only question is whether you're going to profit from it or pretend it doesn't exist while your ranch slowly dies. What's the job? Similar to last time, but with a longer drive. You'd be taking a package from the same pickup location to Denver. The pay is $15,000 this time. $15,000. That would be enough to make a real dent in what he owed the bank, maybe even buy him 6 months instead of the 2 he'd gained from the first job. Why more money? Distance, time commitment, and the fact that you're a proven commodity. Think of it as a performance bonus. Marcus closed his eyes and leaned against the barn wall. The pregnant cow lowed softly, as if sensing his distress. I need time to think. Of course. But I need an answer by tomorrow evening. Same number, same timeline. The line went dead, and Marcus found himself staring at his phone in the dusty light filtering through the barn windows. Around him, the cattle continued their quiet routine, oblivious to the storm building in their owner's mind. That evening at dinner, Sarah was unusually chatty, excited about a new job opportunity she'd heard about at the bank in town. The head teller position was opening up, and the manager had specifically mentioned Sarah as a strong candidate. It would mean regular hours, she said, passing Marcus the mashed potatoes. Better pay, health insurance, and I wouldn't come home smelling like grease from the diner anymore. Emma called during dessert, full of enthusiasm about her organic chemistry class and plans for veterinary school applications. She talked for 20 minutes about her professors, her friends, and the internship she was hoping to land at a large animal practice in Colorado. Dad, I can't tell you how grateful I am that you guys are making this possible, she said before hanging up. I know things have been tight, but you're giving me a chance at a real future. After Sarah went to bed, Marcus sat in his kitchen with a cup of coffee and tried to think through his options objectively. The ranch was still bleeding money. Even with the temporary reprieve he'd bought from the bank, the fundamental math hadn't changed. Unless cattle prices improved dramatically or he found a way to reduce operating costs, he'd be back in the same desperate situation within months. The honest truth was that $15,000 could change everything. It would give him enough breathing room to make strategic decisions instead of just reacting to crises. He could invest in better feed, repair equipment before it broke down, maybe even expand his herd if market conditions improved. But there was no guarantee this would be the last time Vincent called. Each job made the next one easier to justify, each payment made it harder to walk away. Marcus wasn't naive enough to think he could dip his toe in this world without eventually being pulled in deeper. The next evening, Marcus made the call. I'm in, but I want to know what happens after this. Are you going to keep calling every few weeks with new jobs? That depends entirely on you, Mr. Thompson. I have a number of reliable contractors, but I'm always looking for people who can handle more complex assignments. Think of this as an audition for a more permanent arrangement. What kind of permanent arrangement? The kind that could solve all your financial problems permanently. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. One job at a time. The pickup instructions were identical to the first time. Midnight at the grain elevator, black SUV, no questions asked. The difference was the destination, a storage facility in Denver, nearly a 6-hour drive each way. Marcus would be gone all night and most of the next day. He told Sarah he was driving to a cattle auction in Colorado, checking out breeding stock for potential purchase. She kissed him goodbye and wished him luck, completely trusting his explanation. The package this time was larger, about the size of a shoe box and significantly heavier. Whatever was inside shifted and clinked softly when Marcus placed it carefully in his passenger seat. The sound made his stomach turn, but he forced himself not to think about it. The drive to Denver was long and lonely. Marcus stuck to back highways, avoiding interstate checkpoints and high-traffic areas. He stopped once for gas and coffee, keeping the package locked in his truck while he went inside to pay. Denver at dawn was a sprawling maze of suburbs and industrial districts. The storage facility was in a rough part of town, surrounded by chain-link fences and security cameras. Marcus found the specified unit and followed the same routine: flash headlights, wait for contact, exchange package for payment. The man who met him this time was different from the others. Younger, more nervous, with the kind of eyes that had seen too much too soon. He examined the package carefully before handing over the payment envelope. "Vincent says you're good people," the young man said. "Reliable. That's rare in this business." "What business is that exactly?" The man smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "The kind where asking questions can be hazardous to your health. Have a safe drive home, Mr. Thompson." The return trip felt longer than the drive down. Marcus found himself constantly checking his mirrors, hyper-aware of every police car and unusual vehicle he passed. By the time he pulled into his driveway at 3 in the afternoon, he was exhausted and paranoid. Sarah was at work, but she'd left a note on the kitchen table. The bank manager had called about scheduling a meeting to discuss his account. It was probably routine follow-up on their payment plan, but Marcus felt a chill of fear. What if someone had noticed the cash deposits? What if there were questions he couldn't answer? That evening, Marcus counted the $15,000 3 times before hiding it in a new location. He'd opened a safety deposit box in the next town over, paying cash for the rental and using it to store most of his earnings from Vincent's jobs. The money was clean as far as the IRS was concerned, reported as income from private cattle sales, but Marcus knew better than to keep it around the house. Over the next few days, everything seemed normal. Sarah got the job at the bank and gave notice at the diner. Emma called to share her excitement about being accepted into a summer research program. The pregnant cow delivered a healthy calf without complications. Life was good, or at least it appeared to be from the outside. But Marcus found himself changing in subtle ways. He was more alert to his surroundings, more suspicious of strangers, more careful about what he said and to whom. When a new neighbor moved into the property down the road, Marcus's first thought wasn't about being neighborly. It was about whether the timing was suspicious, whether the man might be watching him. Vincent called again 2 weeks later. "I have a proposition for you, Mr. Thompson. Not just another transport job, but a chance to move into a more lucrative role in our organization." "What kind of role?" "Coordination. Management. Using your ranch as a temporary storage and distribution point for our operations in the region. The compensation would be substantial. $50,000 up front, plus monthly payments that would eliminate your debt entirely within a year." Marcus felt like he was standing on the edge of a cliff, looking down into an abyss that promised salvation and damnation in equal measure. What would that involve? Occasionally storing packages in your outbuildings. Providing a safe meeting location for business associates. Using your legitimate cattle operation as cover for other activities. Nothing that would put your family in direct danger, but definitely a deeper level of involvement. And, if I say no? Then, you continue as you are. Occasional transport jobs, steady but limited income. Of course, those opportunities might become less frequent as we develop other resources. The threat was subtle but unmistakable. Marcus had become useful to Vincent's organization, but he wasn't irreplaceable. If he didn't step up, he might find himself cut out entirely, back to facing foreclosure with no way to generate the income he'd become dependent on. "I need time to consider this." "Of course. But don't take too long, Mr. Thompson. Opportunities like this don't stay open indefinitely. That night, Marcus walked the perimeter of his property in the darkness, looking at his land with new eyes. The old barn could easily hide packages without Sarah noticing. The back pastures were invisible from the road and rarely visited by neighbors. The ranch was perfectly positioned for exactly the kind of activities Vincent was describing. He thought about his grandfather again, wondering what the old man would say about using the family land for criminal enterprises. But he also thought about Emma's dreams, Sarah's new job, and the chance to finally stop worrying about money every single day. Standing in the cold Montana night, surrounded by 3 generations of honest work and family history, Marcus Thompson made the decision that would transform him from a desperate rancher into something else entirely. Something he wasn't sure he recognized, but something that might finally be strong enough to protect everything he loved. The next morning, he called Vincent's number. "I'm interested in hearing more about this coordination role," Marcus said. "Excellent. I'll be in touch with details soon. Welcome to the organization, Mr. Thompson." As he hung up the phone, Marcus caught his reflection in the kitchen window. The man looking back at him had the same face, the same weathered hands, the same tired eyes. But something fundamental had changed. The rancher who had received that first phone call 3 weeks ago was gone, replaced by someone willing to do whatever it took to survive. Marcus Thompson had crossed more than just a line. He had entered a new world entirely, and he was about to discover that some doors, once opened, can never be closed again. The transformation of Marcus Thompson's ranch from a struggling cattle operation into a criminal distribution hub happened gradually, almost imperceptibly at first. Vincent Carrera was nothing if not methodical, introducing changes slowly enough that they felt natural, inevitable even. What started with occasional package storage evolved into regular meetings, which grew into a full-scale operation that would have been unrecognizable to the desperate man who had taken that first phone call months earlier. The $50,000 signing bonus had arrived exactly as promised, delivered by a courier who looked like a college student but carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone accustomed to handling dangerous cargo. Marcus had deposited the money in carefully structured amounts, spreading it across multiple accounts and justifying it as payment for a private cattle sale to out-of-state buyers. His accountant had been impressed by what appeared to be a remarkable turnaround in the ranch's fortunes. Sarah was thriving in her new position at the bank. The regular hours and steady paycheck had transformed her from a worried, exhausted woman into someone who actually smiled at dinner again. She attributed their improved financial situation to Marcus's business acumen and hard work, never questioning the sudden influx of cash that had saved their home. Why would she? Her husband had always been resourceful, and the cattle business was notoriously unpredictable. Good times followed bad times, and it was about time they caught a break. Emma was finishing her sophomore year with honors, already talking about veterinary school applications and the expensive prerequisites she'd need to complete. The summer research program in Colorado was a prestigious opportunity that would look excellent on her applications, but it also came with costs that would have been impossible to manage just a few months earlier. Now, Marcus could write the check without hesitation, watching his daughter's face light up with possibilities that his criminal activities had made possible. The irony wasn't lost on him. He was breaking the law to ensure his daughter could pursue a career dedicated to healing and protecting innocent animals. He was lying to his wife daily so she could sleep peacefully at night. He was transforming his family's legacy into something his grandfather would have found abhorrent, all in the name of preserving it. Vincent's organization had established a routine that fit seamlessly into the ranch's daily operations. Packages arrived at varying intervals, sometimes small envelopes, sometimes crates that required careful handling. Marcus had converted a section of the old grain storage building into a climate-controlled space where items could be kept safely until pickup. He'd told Sarah he was modernizing their feed storage system, which wasn't entirely a lie. The improvements did make their legitimate cattle operation more efficient. The meetings were held in the ranch's back office, a small building that had originally been used for equipment maintenance. Vincent had paid to have it renovated with better insulation, security cameras, and soundproofing under the guise of creating a proper business center for cattle sales. Sarah had been impressed by her husband's commitment to professionalizing their operation. Marcus's role had evolved far beyond simple package transport. He now coordinated schedules between various members of Vincent's organization, maintained detailed but coded records of transactions, and served as a local intelligence source for law enforcement activities in the area. His clean record and community standing made him an ideal frontman for operations that required interaction with legitimate businesses and government officials. The monthly payments Vincent had promised were deposited like clockwork, always in amounts that could be justified as cattle sales or consulting fees. Marcus had become skilled at creating paper trails that would satisfy any reasonable audit. He bought and sold cattle through intermediaries, generating legitimate income that could be mixed with his illegal earnings. The ranch was actually profitable for the first time in years, though not from anything having to do with livestock. But success in Vincent's world came with complications that Marcus hadn't anticipated. Other organizations had taken notice of the increased activity in their territory. There had been subtle probes, careful inquiries from competitors trying to determine the source of Vincent's expanded capabilities. Marcus found himself learning about territorial disputes, supply chain management, and conflict resolution in ways that no legitimate businessman ever should. The first real test of his loyalty came on a Wednesday morning in late May. Marcus was checking on the new calves when a black sedan pulled into his driveway. Two men in expensive suits got out, moving with the casual confidence of people accustomed to getting what they wanted through intimidation. "Mr. Thompson? I'm Detective Ray Morrison, this is Detective Kim Lee. We're with the Montana State Police. We'd like to ask you a few questions about some unusual activity we've noticed in the area." Marcus felt his heart rate spike, but years of dealing with cattle buyers and government inspectors had taught him how to appear calm under pressure. "Of course, officers. What kind of activity?" "We've had reports of increased traffic on the back roads around here. Late-night vehicles, people who don't seem to be locals. You notice anything like that?" "Can't say that I have. This is pretty remote country, though. People use these roads to avoid the highway sometimes, especially truckers trying to save on fuel." Detective Morrison nodded slowly, his eyes scanning the ranch buildings. "Mind if we take a look around?" "Just a routine check." "Do you have a warrant?" Marcus asked the question casually, as if he were simply curious about proper procedure rather than protecting criminal evidence. "Not necessary for a consensual search. Unless you have some reason to object?" This was the moment Vincent had warned him about. How Marcus handled this interaction would determine whether his new career continued or ended in handcuffs. He thought about the packages currently stored in the grain building, the modified office space, the coded records hidden in his house. "No objection at all," Marcus said with a smile. "Though I should warn you, it's calving season. The mama cows can get pretty protective if strangers get too close." He led the detectives on a carefully planned tour, staying away from sensitive areas while appearing completely cooperative. The grain building was locked, which Marcus explained as necessary to keep cattle out of expensive feed supplements. The office was clean of anything incriminating, as Vincent's security protocols required. Marcus's acting skills, honed through months of lying to his family, served him well. "Nice operation you've got here," Detective Lee observed. "Business must be good. These improvements look expensive." "We've had a good year. Finally, got lucky with some cattle sales and decided to reinvest in the infrastructure. My grandfather always said you've got to spend money to make money." After an hour, the detectives left without finding anything suspicious. Marcus maintained his friendly demeanor until their car disappeared down the driveway, then immediately called Vincent's emergency number. "We may have a problem," Marcus said when Vincent answered. "I know. We've been monitoring police communications. You handled that perfectly, by the way. Professional, cooperative, but not overeager. They'll mark you down as a solid citizen who's simply doing well for himself. What if they come back with a warrant? They won't. They're fishing, looking for patterns and connections. As long as we maintain operational discipline, you're just a successful rancher who's turned his business around. But the visit from the detectives had shaken Marcus more than he wanted to admit. For months, he'd been operating in a bubble where his criminal activities felt almost abstract, like a game with financial rewards rather than real-world consequences. The appearance of actual law enforcement officers on his property had made the risks brutally concrete. That evening, Sarah noticed his distraction during dinner. "You seem worried about something. Everything okay?" "Just thinking about the cattle market. Prices have been volatile lately." It was a safe lie, one that explained his mood without raising questions. Sarah had learned not to press too hard when Marcus was dealing with business stress. She squeezed his hand and changed the subject to Emma's latest phone call. Later that night, alone in his study, Marcus opened the encrypted laptop Vincent had provided for communication and record-keeping. The device contained details of transactions, schedules, and personnel that would destroy dozens of lives if it ever fell into the wrong hands. His own included. He scrolled through the financial records, calculating his earnings over the past 6 months. The numbers were staggering. Between the signing bonus and monthly payments, he'd made more money working for Vincent than the ranch had generated in its best 5 years combined. Emma's entire college education was now fully funded. The mortgage was nearly paid off. Sarah could quit working if she wanted to, though she loved her new job too much to consider it. But the money had come with a price beyond simple moral compromise. Marcus found himself thinking like a criminal, analyzing every interaction for potential threats, maintaining lies that required constant vigilance. He'd become skilled at compartmentalization, keeping his legitimate life separate from his illegal activities, but the strain was beginning to show. The next morning brought another call from Vincent, but this time the conversation was different. There was tension in Vincent's voice that Marcus hadn't heard before. "We need to discuss some operational changes," Vincent said. "Can you meet me at the usual location tonight?" "What kind of changes?" "The kind that require face-to-face conversation." Midnight. The ranch office felt different when Marcus arrived that night. Vincent was already there, but he wasn't alone. 2 other men flanked him, both clearly armed and alert. The atmosphere was more formal, more dangerous than previous meetings. "Sit down, Marcus." Vincent's use of his first name was ominous. In their professional relationship, it had always been Mr. Thompson. The increased law enforcement attention is forcing us to evolve our operations. We're consolidating activities, reducing the number of locations we use, and increasing security protocols at the remaining sites. What does that mean for me? It means your role is expanding significantly. This ranch is becoming our primary distribution hub for the northern region. More packages, more meetings, more personnel moving through here on a regular basis. Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the Montana night air. "That's a lot more exposure than we discussed originally." "Yes, it is. It's also a lot more money. Your monthly compensation is doubling, and there will be substantial bonuses for successful major operations." One of Vincent's associates leaned forward. "The thing is, Marcus, we're past the point of casual involvement. You know too much about our operations, our people, our methods. You're either all in, or you're a liability we need to manage." The threat was explicit, delivered in a calm voice that made it even more terrifying. Marcus understood now that he'd passed a point of no return without realizing it. There was no graceful exit from this world, no way to take his money and walk away clean. "What exactly are you asking me to do?" Vincent smiled, but it was cold and calculating. We're asking you to become a full partner in our organization. To let us use this ranch as our base of operations for the region. To accept that your old life as a simple cattle rancher is over, and embrace what you've become instead. And, if I refuse? Then, we'll be very disappointed, the other associate said. And, disappointed people in our business tend to make poor decisions that everyone ends up regretting. Marcus looked around the office, taking in the security cameras, the reinforced door, the communications equipment that had transformed his grandfather's simple storage building into a criminal command center. He thought about Sarah sleeping peacefully in their farmhouse, trusting that her husband was building a legitimate future for their family. He thought about Emma, excited about her summer research program and veterinary school applications. How much money are we talking about? Marcus asked. Vincent's smile became genuine. Enough to make you a very wealthy man. Enough to ensure your family never wants for anything ever again. Enough to make all of this worthwhile. As Marcus listened to the details of his expanded role, he realized that the desperate rancher who had answered that first phone call was truly gone. In his place sat someone harder, more calculating, more willing to accept moral compromise in exchange for financial security. The transformation was complete. Marcus Thompson was no longer a struggling cattle rancher who occasionally transported packages for criminals. He was a criminal himself, a full partner in an organization that trafficked in things he still didn't want to think about too carefully. But, as he shook hands with Vincent to seal their new arrangement, Marcus couldn't bring himself to feel regret. His family was secure, his daughter's future was bright, and his wife was happy. If that required him to become someone his grandfather wouldn't recognize, it seemed like a fair trade. At least, it did until the phone rang 3 weeks later, and Marcus learned that some transformations come with consequences that no amount of money can fix. The call came at 3:17 in the morning, jerking Marcus from the first peaceful sleep he'd managed in weeks. He'd been dreaming about his grandfather, about simpler times when right and wrong were clearly defined lines rather than blurred boundaries. The shrill ring of his encrypted phone cut through the Montana darkness like a blade. "We have a problem." Vincent's voice was tight with controlled panic, a tone Marcus had never heard from the usually unflappable businessman. A major shipment was intercepted at the Canadian border. The driver talked. Marcus sat up in bed, suddenly, wide awake. What did he say? Everything. Names, locations, routes, methods. The whole operation is compromised. Law enforcement is moving fast, and they're moving tonight. What do you need me to do? Clean house. Everything. Every record, every piece of equipment, every trace that we were ever there. You have maybe 3 hours before they arrive with warrants. The line went dead, leaving Marcus alone with the crushing weight of what Vincent had just told him. 3 hours to dismantle an operation that had taken months to build. 3 hours to destroy evidence of crimes that could send him to prison for decades. 3 hours to figure out how to protect his family from the consequences of his choices. Sarah stirred beside him, her face peaceful in the moonlight streaming through their bedroom window. She had no idea that their world was about to explode, that the husband she trusted had built their financial security on a foundation of lies that was now crumbling beneath them. Marcus slipped out of bed and dressed quickly in the darkness. He'd rehearsed this scenario in his mind dozens of times, but the reality felt surreal, like watching someone else's life fall apart in fast forward. The emergency protocols Vincent had drilled into him kicked in automatically, muscle memory taking over where conscious thought failed. The ranch was eerily quiet as Marcus made his way to the modified office building. The security cameras that had seemed like protection now felt like evidence of guilt, recording his panicked movements for future investigators to analyze. He disabled the system first, then began the systematic destruction of everything that connected him to Vincent's organization. The encrypted laptop went into the industrial shredder Vincent had insisted on installing. Hard drives were removed from recording equipment and destroyed with a hammer before being dissolved in acid. Paper records went into a burn barrel behind the building, the flames casting dancing shadows across the ranch yard like spirits of his former life saying goodbye. The packages currently in storage presented the biggest challenge. Marcus had never asked what was in them, but their value was clearly enormous based on the security protocols surrounding their handling. Now they represented potential evidence that could destroy not just him, but his entire family. There was only one safe option. Marcus loaded the packages into his truck and drove to the old quarry 20 miles north of his ranch. The abandoned limestone pit was hundreds of feet deep, filled with black water that had never given up its secrets. He weighted each package with chains and rocks before consigning them to the depths, watching months of criminal profits disappear beneath the surface without a trace. By the time he returned to the ranch, the eastern sky was beginning to show the first hints of dawn. Marcus had one more crucial task before the authorities arrived. He needed to prepare Sarah for what was coming, to give her a story that might protect her from prosecution as an accessory. He found her in the kitchen, already dressed and making coffee with the efficiency of someone accustomed to early ranch mornings. She looked up as he entered, immediately noticing his disheveled appearance and stressed expression. "Marcus? What's wrong? You look terrible." This was the moment he'd been dreading since Vincent's first phone call months ago. The moment when his two worlds would collide and destroy everything he'd been trying to protect. "Sarah, I need you to listen to me very carefully. Some police officers are going to come here this morning, probably with a warrant to search the property. They're going to ask you questions about our finances, about recent improvements to the ranch, about people who have visited here." Sarah's face went pale. "Why? What's this about?" "There's been some kind of mistake, some confusion about our cattle sales. The officers think we might be involved in something illegal." It was a weak lie, but it was the best Marcus could manage under the circumstances. He couldn't tell her the truth without making her an accessory after the fact. Better that she face questioning as an innocent wife who knew nothing about her husband's criminal activities. "I don't understand. What could they possibly think we've done?" "I don't know exactly. Something about money laundering, maybe tax evasion. The important thing is that you tell them the absolute truth about everything you know. Don't try to protect me or make me look better. Just answer their questions honestly." Sarah's hands were trembling as she set down her coffee cup. "Marcus, you're scaring me. Are we in some kind of trouble?" Before he could answer, the sound of vehicles approaching the ranch interrupted their conversation. Marcus looked out the window to see a convoy of law enforcement vehicles turning into their driveway. FBI, state police, county sheriffs, even what looked like DEA agents. This wasn't the polite fishing expedition they'd faced months earlier. This was a full-scale raid. "Remember what I told you," Marcus said, taking Sarah's hands in his. "Tell them the truth about what you know. Nothing more, nothing less." The next few hours passed in a blur of controlled chaos. Federal agents with search warrants swarmed over the ranch, dismantling everything Marcus had built with methodical precision. They found the modified office building, the storage areas, the communication equipment he'd missed in his hurried cleanup. Most damaging of all, they found traces of the packages he'd stored, chemical residues and packaging materials that painted a clear picture of illegal activity. Marcus was read his rights and taken into custody while Sarah watched from their front porch, her face a mask of shock and confusion. The sight of his wife standing alone as federal agents led him away in handcuffs was worse than any prison sentence he might face. The interrogation room at the federal building in Helena was designed to be intimidating, all concrete walls and harsh fluorescent lighting. Marcus sat across from Special Agent Jennifer Chen and Detective Morrison, the same state police detective who had visited his ranch months earlier. "You're in serious trouble, Mr. Thompson," Agent Chen began. "We have enough evidence to charge you with conspiracy to distribute controlled substances, money laundering, operating a continuing criminal enterprise, and about a dozen other federal felonies." You're looking at 20 to 30 years minimum. I want a lawyer. That's your right, but I think you should hear what we're offering first. We know you're not the mastermind here. Vincent Carrera is who we really want, and you're the key to building a case against him. Detective Morrison leaned forward. We've been watching this operation for months, Marcus. We know about the packages, the meetings, the money. What we don't know is the full extent of the organization, the suppliers, the distribution network. Help us fill in those blanks, and we can make your situation much more manageable. I told you, I want a lawyer. Agent Chen slid a folder across the table. These are photos from your daughter's college campus. Emma, right? Bright girl, good grades, wants to be a veterinarian. It would be a shame if her future was destroyed by her father's poor choices. The threat was subtle but unmistakable. Marcus felt a surge of rage, but he forced himself to remain calm. These people were professionals, and losing his temper would only make things worse. My family had nothing to do with this. We know that. But federal sentencing guidelines don't care about your good intentions. If you're convicted on all charges, your assets will be seized, including the ranch. Your wife will lose her job at the bank, obviously. Emma will have to drop out of college. Everything you were trying to protect will be destroyed anyway. Unless you cooperate. Help us build a case against Vincent and his organization, and we can recommend a reduced sentence. 5 years instead of 30. Your family keeps the ranch, Emma finishes school, Sarah keeps her job. Everyone moves on with their lives. Marcus closed his eyes, trying to think through the implications. Cooperating with law enforcement meant betraying Vincent, who had made it clear what happened to people who crossed his organization. It meant admitting to crimes that would destroy his reputation in the community he'd called home his entire life. But refusing meant sacrificing his family's future to protect criminals who had manipulated his desperation for their own profit. What exactly would cooperation involve? Detailed statements about every aspect of the operation. Names, dates, methods, financial arrangements. Testimony in court when we prosecute Vincent and his associates. Continued surveillance and recording if Vincent tries to contact you. And, if Vincent finds out I'm cooperating? Agent Chen and Detective Morrison exchanged glances. We'll do everything we can to protect you and your family. Witness protection might be an option if the threat level becomes too severe. Witness protection. New identities, new lives, permanent separation from everything they'd ever known. It was almost as devastating as the alternatives. Marcus spent the next 6 hours in detailed debriefing sessions, revealing everything he knew about Vincent's operation. The scale of the organization was larger than he'd realized, spanning multiple states and involving dozens of people in various roles. His ranch had been just one piece of a complex puzzle that federal agents had been trying to solve for years. By evening, Marcus was released on his own recognizance, pending formal charges and trial. The drive home felt like traveling through a foreign country, familiar landmarks transformed by the knowledge that everything had changed forever. Sarah was waiting for him in the kitchen, her eyes red from crying but her posture straight with determination. The FBI agents told me some things. About what you've been doing, about why they arrested you. Sarah, I can explain. No. You can't explain. There's no explanation that makes this okay. You lied to me for months. You put our family in danger. You used our home for criminal activities while I slept 10 feet away, completely oblivious. The pain in her voice was worse than any physical punishment Marcus could have faced. He'd known this moment would come eventually, but he hadn't prepared himself for how completely it would devastate him. I was trying to save the ranch. To save our family. By destroying it? By becoming a criminal? By lying to everyone who trusted you? Emma's voice came from the kitchen doorway. Dad? Marcus turned to see his daughter standing there, still wearing her college sweatshirt, her face a mixture of confusion and betrayal. She'd driven home from Colorado as soon as Sarah called, arriving just in time to witness the complete collapse of everything she'd believed about her father. "The FBI agent said you were working with drug dealers. That the money for my tuition, for the ranch improvements, all of it came from criminal activities. Emma, I never meant for you to be involved. Everything I did was to protect you, to give you opportunities paid for with drug money?" Her voice cracked with emotion. "Do you have any idea what this means? What people are going to think? What this does to our family's reputation?" Marcus reached toward his daughter, but she stepped back, the physical rejection more painful than anything the federal agents had threatened. "I need some air," Emma said, walking out the back door into the Montana night. Sarah and Marcus sat in silence for several minutes, the kitchen that had been the heart of their family life now feeling like a courtroom where final judgments were being rendered. "What happens now?" Sarah finally asked. "I cooperate with the FBI. I testify against Vincent and his organization. I probably go to prison for a few years, but hopefully not decades. And us?" Marcus met his wife's eyes, seeing in them the death of a marriage that had survived 30 years of struggles but couldn't survive his betrayal. "I don't know. That's up to you." Sarah nodded slowly, as if she'd already made her decision but wasn't ready to voice it yet. "I think you should sleep in the guest room tonight. And probably for the foreseeable future." As Marcus lay awake in the unfamiliar bed, staring at the ceiling of what had once been their daughter's childhood bedroom, he tried to calculate the true cost of his choices. The financial benefits were meaningless now. The ranch was saved but his family was destroyed. Emma's education was secure but her respect for him was gone. Sarah was financially stable but emotionally devastated. He'd thought he was protecting them, but he'd actually been protecting himself. Protecting his pride, his sense of responsibility, his refusal to admit failure. The desperate rancher who had answered Vincent's first phone call had been scared of losing everything he valued. The criminal he'd become had lost it anyway, and taken his soul in the bargain. Outside his window, Marcus could see the lights of the ranch buildings where federal agents had spent the day collecting evidence of his crimes. Tomorrow, he would begin the process of testifying against Vincent Carrera, exchanging one form of betrayal for another. Tonight, he was alone with the consequences of believing that good intentions could justify evil actions, that love for his family could excuse lies and criminality. The rancher who had slowly tightened his grip on that phone months ago had finally let go of everything that mattered. And, in the darkness of a guest room in his own house, Marcus Thompson began to understand that some choices can never be undone, some transformations can never be reversed, and some prices are too high to pay no matter how desperately you need what they're selling. 2 years later, Marcus Thompson walked out of the federal correctional facility in Sheridan, Wyoming, carrying a canvas bag containing everything he owned in the world. The Montana sky stretched endlessly above him, the same big sky that had watched over his family's ranch for 3 generations. But the man breathing that free air was fundamentally different from the desperate rancher who had entered the prison system 24 months earlier. The plea bargain had worked exactly as Agent Chen had promised. Marcus's cooperation had been instrumental in dismantling Vincent Carrera's organization, leading to dozens of arrests and the seizure of millions of dollars in assets. Vincent himself was serving a life sentence without possibility of parole, his empire reduced to evidence boxes in federal storage facilities. Marcus had testified for 8 days during the trial, his detailed knowledge of the operation's inner workings helping prosecutors secure convictions that would keep dangerous criminals off the streets for decades. In exchange, Marcus had received a sentence of 3 years, with credit for time served and early release for good behavior. It was a fraction of what he might have faced, but the real punishment hadn't been measured in months behind bars. It had been measured in the slow dissolution of everything he'd tried to save through his criminal activities. Sarah was waiting for him outside the prison gates, but she wasn't alone. Her divorce attorney sat in the passenger seat of her car, a symbolic presence that spoke louder than any words about how completely their marriage had ended. She'd filed for divorce 6 months after his arrest, citing irreconcilable differences that were really irreparable trust violations. The proceedings had been civil but final, dividing assets that had been built on lies and criminal profits. "Hello, Marcus," Sarah said when he approached the car. She looked good, healthier than she had in years. The stress lines that had marked her face during their financial struggles were gone, replaced by the calm confidence of someone who had rebuilt their life on solid ground. "Sarah. Thank you for coming. Emma wanted to be here, but she's defending her master's thesis next week. She sends her love." Emma had surprised everyone by not only finishing college but excelling in her veterinary studies. The scandal of her father's arrest had followed her initially, but her academic performance and determination had earned the respect of her professors and peers. She was graduating with honors and had already been accepted into several prestigious veterinary programs. The money Marcus had earned through his criminal activities had indeed secured her future, but at a cost that none of them had anticipated. "How is she?" "Strong. Angry sometimes, but strong. She's learned to separate who you were as a father from what you became as a criminal. It's taken therapy and time, but she's getting there." They drove in silence through the familiar landscape of eastern Wyoming, heading toward Montana and a ranch that no longer belonged to Marcus. The federal asset forfeiture laws had been clear: proceeds from criminal activities were subject to seizure, including property purchased or improved with illegal funds. However, because Sarah had been an innocent spouse with no knowledge of her husband's crimes, she'd been allowed to retain her share of the marital assets. The ranch was now entirely hers, a fact that should have felt like justice but instead felt like another form of loss. "I've made some changes to the place," Sarah said as they crossed the Montana state line. "Expanded the legitimate cattle operation, brought in some partners who know how to run a profitable ranch without breaking the law." The implied criticism stung, but Marcus knew he deserved it. His criminal shortcut to financial stability had ultimately cost them far more than bankruptcy ever could have. At least failure would have left their integrity intact. "Are you happy?" Marcus asked. Sarah considered the question for several miles before answering. "I'm content. I'm building something honest, something I can be proud of. That matters more than I realized when I was younger." When they reached the ranch, Marcus was struck by how different everything looked. The buildings he'd modified for criminal use had been restored to their original purposes or completely rebuilt. The office where Vincent had held his meetings was now a legitimate business center where Sarah managed cattle sales and ranch operations. The grain storage building where Marcus had hidden packages was now actually used for storing grain, a concept so novel it felt revolutionary. "You don't have to stay here," Sarah said as she parked near the farmhouse. "I mean, you're welcome to visit Emma when she's home, and there's always a place for you here as her father. But this isn't your home anymore. You understand that, right?" Marcus nodded. He'd known this moment would come, but hearing it spoken aloud still felt like a physical blow. This land had been in his family for 3 generations. His grandfather had built the original farmhouse with his own hands. His father had taught him to ride horses in these pastures. Now he was a visitor on property that bore his family name but no longer belonged to him. "Where will you go?" "I've been accepted into a program in Billings. Vocational rehabilitation for ex-offenders. They help people build legitimate careers after prison." Marcus had spent his incarceration studying, earning certifications in equipment repair and farm management. The skills that had made him a successful rancher could be applied to helping other agricultural operations, assuming anyone would hire a convicted felon. "That sounds good. Honest work." "Yeah. Honest work." They stood awkwardly near Sarah's car, two people who had once planned to grow old together now struggling to find common ground for even a brief conversation. The Montana wind whistled through the ranch buildings, carrying the scent of cattle and hay that had once meant home but now felt like memories of someone else's life. "Marcus, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me." "Okay. Was any of it real? Our marriage, your love for Emma and me, the dreams we had for this place? Or was it all just cover for what you were really doing?" The question hit harder than any punishment the federal justice system had devised. Marcus looked at the woman who had shared his life for 30 years, who had trusted him completely until his lies made that trust impossible to maintain. It was all real. Every moment of it. That's what made the lying so awful. I wasn't pretending to love you and Emma while I worked with criminals. I was betraying people I loved more than life itself because I was too proud to admit I was failing as a provider. Sarah's eyes filled with tears she'd probably been holding back for 2 years. "That's what I was afraid you'd say. It would have been easier if you'd been a sociopath who never cared about us. Then, I could hate you cleanly instead of mourning the man I thought I married." Emma arrived that evening, driving up the familiar ranch road in a small hybrid car that announced her practical approach to life. She'd grown into a confident young woman during her father's incarceration, her features still showing traces of the girl who used to help with ranch chores but her bearing reflecting someone who'd learned to face hard truths without flinching. "Dad." She hugged him tentatively, as if she wasn't sure whether affection was appropriate given the circumstances. "Emma. You look wonderful. Your mother tells me you're finishing your master's degree. Veterinary pathology. I specialize in diseases affecting cattle and other livestock. Ironic, considering where I grew up." They had dinner together, the three of them around the kitchen table where they'd shared thousands of family meals. But the easy conversation and comfortable silences of their earlier life had been replaced by careful politeness and avoided subjects. Marcus was no longer the head of the household or even a permanent member of the family. He was a guest whose presence required everyone to be on their best behavior. After dinner, Emma asked to speak with him privately. They walked to the barn where Marcus had once found peace among the cattle he'd worked so hard to protect. "I've been angry with you for a long time," Emma said without preamble. "Not just about the criminal stuff, but about the lying. About thinking you could manipulate our lives without our knowledge or consent. I was trying to protect you. No, you were trying to protect yourself. From having to admit failure, from having to ask for help, from having to tell us that you couldn't solve our problems on your own. You chose to become a criminal rather than trust your family to face reality together." The accuracy of her assessment was devastating. Marcus had convinced himself that his criminal activities were noble sacrifices for his family's benefit, but Emma saw through that rationalization to the selfish pride that had actually motivated his choices. "You're right. I was a coward who disguised his cowardice as heroism." "Yes, you were. But you were also my father who taught me to ride horses and helped me with my homework and believed in my dreams when everyone else thought veterinary school was too expensive and competitive for a rancher's daughter." Emma's voice softened slightly. "I can't forgive what you did, Dad. Maybe someday, but not yet. But I can try to understand why you did it, and I can still love the man you were before you made those choices. What does that mean for us going forward? It means you're still my father, but you're not my hero anymore. It means I'll always care about what happens to you, but I won't trust you the way I used to. It means you can be part of my life, but not the center of it." Marcus nodded, accepting terms that felt both generous and heartbreaking. His daughter was offering him a relationship based on realistic assessment of who he'd become rather than idealized memories of who he'd been. It was more than he deserved and less than he'd lost. The next morning, Sarah drove Marcus to the Greyhound station in the county seat. His few possessions fit easily in the canvas bag, a dramatic contrast to the accumulated belongings of a lifetime spent building something permanent. The bus to Billings would carry him toward a future that felt as uncertain as the desperate situation that had led to his first conversation with Vincent Carrera. "Will you write?" Sarah asked as they waited for his bus to arrive. "If you want me to. I think I'd like that. Not often, but occasionally. I'd like to know how you're doing." The bus pulled into the station, its diesel engine rumbling like the machinery that had once powered the ranch's daily operations. Marcus picked up his bag and turned to face the woman who had been the center of his world for 3 decades. "Sarah, if I could change everything that happened, if I could go back and face bankruptcy rather than becoming a criminal, would that make a difference?" She considered the question carefully, as she always had when he asked for her honest opinion about important matters. "No, Marcus. It wouldn't change what you did, and it wouldn't restore my ability to trust you. But asking the question shows you understand what you really lost. That's something, even if it's not enough." Marcus boarded the bus and found a seat near the back, watching through the window as Sarah drove away from the station. The Montana landscape rolled past the windows as the bus headed east, carrying him away from everything he'd ever known toward a future that offered redemption without restoration. The vocational program in Billings was designed for people like him, ex-offenders trying to rebuild their lives through honest work and careful choices. Marcus threw himself into the training with the same intensity he'd once applied to ranching, learning equipment repair and farm management techniques that could make him valuable to agricultural operations throughout the region. The work was satisfying in ways his criminal activities had never been. Each machine he repaired, each efficiency he helped implement, each problem he solved represented genuine value creation rather than parasitic theft from legitimate society. The pay was modest compared to what he'd earned working for Vincent, but it was clean money that didn't require lies or moral compromises. 6 months after his release, Marcus received a letter from Emma. She'd graduated with highest honors and been accepted into a doctoral program in veterinary pathology at Colorado State University. Her research would focus on infectious diseases affecting livestock, work that could help ranchers like the one her father had once been protect their animals and livelihoods. "I'm proud of the honest work you're doing," she wrote. "It doesn't erase what happened, but it shows you remember who you were before you forgot who you wanted to be." Marcus kept the letter in his wallet, reading it whenever he felt tempted by shortcuts or easy money. The words reminded him that redemption was possible, even if restoration wasn't. He could become someone his daughter might eventually be proud of again, even if he could never again be the hero she'd once believed him to be. A year later, Marcus was hired as a full-time equipment manager by a large cattle operation outside of Great Falls. The job came with a small house and the respect of employers who valued his skills and experience. He'd told them about his criminal conviction during the interview, expecting it to disqualify him from consideration. Instead, the ranch owner had nodded thoughtfully and said that anyone who'd learned from their mistakes was worth more than someone who'd never been tested. On quiet evenings in his modest home, Marcus would sit on his porch and look toward the south, toward the ranch that had been his family's legacy and was now Sarah's future. He couldn't see it from where he lived, but he could feel its presence like a phantom limb, a reminder of what he'd gained and lost through his choices. The rancher who had slowly tightened his grip on Vincent's first phone call was gone, replaced by a man who'd learned that some prices are too high to pay regardless of what they might buy. Marcus Thompson had discovered that losing everything you think you value is sometimes the only way to find what's actually worth keeping. The $10,000 he'd earned in one night had cost him 30 years of trust, love, and belonging. But, in learning to live without those things, he'd finally learned who he was when no one was depending on him to be anyone else. It wasn't the life he'd planned, but it was the life he'd earned. And, for the first time since that desperate night when a stranger had offered him easy money, Marcus Thompson was finally free of the grip that had held him so tightly he'd forgotten how to let go.